Hello, everyone. Welcome to True Crime Long Island Ghosts, where the truth is so terrifying that you want to know it and crawl under your bed at the same time. Today, we will dive into the Long Island serial killer case. The search expands, where each clue opens up a new spiral of tension. But don't worry, I will occasionally add a few jokes so you don't fall asleep in the middle of the story. One morning in May, as the sun was just rising on the Long Island beach, the police discovered dead bodies, more detailed and extremely confusing. These bodies were not like the previous cases, and the killer, the one everyone thought knew all the details, was still lurking somewhere, smiling evilly at the entire investigation system. And here, the story gets really exciting. Will the police be able to track him down, or will the Long Island serial killer disappear into the darkness, leaving behind a bloody beach and a bunch of unanswered questions? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to True Crime Channel Long Island Ghosts, where horror stories not only make you shiver, but also sometimes make you laugh at the ridiculous stupidity of human beings. But today, I advise you to hold onto your coffee cup, sit up straight, because what I'm about to tell you will not be able to take your eyes off Long Island serial killer. The search expands, a case that, when you hear the name, makes you want to close the window, draw the curtains, and hope that everything is just a hoax on the internet. But no, everything is completely true. On a warm May morning, as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the jagged rocks of Gilgo Beach, a terrifying sight appeared that left both police and locals stunned. A body was discovered under a pile of seaweed, half washed up on the shore, half covered in sand. If you're thinking just a body, no big deal, imagine the feelings of a police officer who received a call. "Hello, I found something," only to hear the gasp of a witness on the phone. Immediately, a special investigation team was formed. One of the young cops, fresh out of the academy, even whispered, "I'm definitely going to need a big cup of coffee today, and maybe a bag of sedatives." But before they could prepare themselves, another body appeared, then a third, then a fourth. It seemed the Long Island serial killer had decided that today was the day his beach would become a horror gallery. The story spread like wildfire. Radio, newspapers, and social media were all reporting it. People were scared, but also curious, because there was one undeniable truth. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next, like you can't leave a horror movie at its peak. When the police arrived on the scene, the first thing they did was cordon off the area. The normally quiet beach became a bustling investigation center with police cars, forensic officers, volunteers, and a few journalists lurking around. The police began collecting evidence: footprints in the sand, pieces of cloth, and signs that the body had been moved. A forensic expert, standing there for the first time, sighed and muttered, "I've seen enough cases in my career, but I've never seen something so elaborate." But don't worry, I won't let you dwell on the gloom for too long. Just lift your eyes and smile every now and then, because in every case, there are details that will unintentionally make you laugh, even if it's a forced smile. As they examined the bodies, some clues began to emerge. All the victims were women, and most of them were involved in prostitution on Long Island. The traces showed that the killer was not just a simple act of violence, but also had a certain method in choosing the place, time, and way of disposing of the bodies. One of the most remarkable things was that the bodies were all left in remote areas where the waves could wash away traces, but not too far from the main roads, which led the police to believe that the killer was not completely unfamiliar with the area. He was so familiar with it that it was as if every step was pre-programmed. The experts began to analyze. There were signs of dismemberment, which indicated meticulousness and a calculated attitude before the act. Even more frightening, the third and fourth bodies were found in places that the police had previously thought were inaccessible, and they were both wrapped in discreet materials to avoid quick detection. One young policeman, standing looking at the pile of evidence, exclaimed, "If he wanted to, he could have organized a bloodbath without anyone knowing." And yes, fear began to creep into every corner. But to keep the spirit, they were forced to inject a little humor, because in the investigative profession, if we find him, I bet he has a favorite playlist while he works. I just hope it's not opera. As word spread, the local community began to react. Some were worried, some were curious, some even thought they were the protagonists of the next horror film. Residents were warned not to go to the beach alone, and local emergency services were activated. But the case was not just about bodies and fear, but also about the character of the killer, a highly sophisticated person who knew how to manipulate his surroundings and always left enough traces to cause chaos, but not enough to get caught. Experts began to cross-reference data from old cases with new ones. DNA samples, traces, habits of choosing locations, timing of attacks, all showed a terrifying recurring pattern. "We are dealing with someone whose criminal intelligence is beyond my imagination," exclaimed one senior investigator. Investigation meetings continued from early morning to late at night, with maps, diagrams, and notes everywhere. People were so tense that one forensic expert joked that if they weren't careful, they would need post-mortem therapy. Meanwhile, the media kept up the ante. Images of beaches, police, and bodies wrapped in plastic bags appeared in the newspapers, plunging the community into an atmosphere of both fear and curiosity. However, the police remained cautious because every detail, no matter how small, could be an important clue to finding the killer. When the body was transported to the forensic room, experts began to carefully analyze it. From hair samples, fingernails, to clothes, all were recorded to build the most accurate criminal profile. One thing that caught attention was the killer's tendency to leave behind some personal items as a way to challenge the police or leave a message. A mysterious message that only the observant can recognize. And of course, in times of tension, there is no shortage of teasing each other. A rookie journalist wonders why the police are wearing gloves, and an investigator replies, "If you touch a body without gloves, you will have to take a special cleaning course, and no, there will be no tea or cake to console you." Once all the initial clues have been recorded, the police begin to define the scope of the investigation. The beach is long, there are many dangerous areas, and the killer is likely to know every corner. The community of volunteers also joins in, cleaning the area, looking for traces that might have been missed. One volunteer shares, "I came here because I wanted to help, but I didn't expect to see such a horrifying scene. I thought I was attending a picnic." Meanwhile, data from old cases began to be compared. The timing, the type of victims, the way the bodies were disposed of, all gradually painted a picture of the killer's sophistication and ruthlessness. Behavioral analysts began to profile him, try to predict his next move, but they also admitted that with this guy, any prediction was difficult. He was like a hidden conductor, controlling everything to his own rhythm, said a forensic psychologist. The situation became more tense when a new body was discovered, but this time not on the beach, but in a deserted area near the highway. This opened up the possibility that the killer would change tactics, forcing the police to adjust their investigation plan. He must have read the manual Investigation 101. "How to confuse the police," joked one police officer. The combination of new discoveries and old data sends the investigation team into a tense spiral. Every detail, from the fallen tree to the shoe prints to the scratches on the body, is important. Meanwhile, the public watches every step, sometimes with panic, sometimes with "I want to know the outcome" curiosity. But what's most haunting is that the killer remains at large, still moving freely in the shadows, continuing to plot his next move. And that might...
As soon as the police got down off Gilgo Beach, things began to settle into a tense and chaotic but extremely orderly rhythm, taking off the organic chaos attack only inside understand. If you are imagining police standing around with the armed process, stored in tension, sorry with, the reaction was much more complicated. Police các Parker Hafaradin, Barika Wildflame Willie in the wind, reporter holding the cameras up and down like they were filming a Labuget action movie, and a few curious citizens sneaking over the fence, trying to get a glimpse of the horror without getting too good. As for the investor, they were forced, they face serious, but occasionally a few jokers slip around, if he knows we reinvest in him, he's probably logging in the dark. And the tension was such that every net a little humor to keep from going crazy. The police began an extensive investigation, dividing into several teams, one continued to check the main bit, one monitored the surroundings and wilderness, and another worked with forensic to analyze the body. Each team had extremely important tasks, and Anis Mangmista Kaukaus important clue to slip around. One notable feature was the appearance of special volunteer, self-proclaimed amateur detective, VW Group flashlight, cameras, and sometim sandwich. One volunteer, Daver, Rican, he thought he was just going to help Clitesen, but he ended up witnessing this son and he learned a lesson. Never bring sandwich to the big if you are to skate to eat them. Meanwhile, forensic experts began to analyze the body more closely, the mutilation, the cloth, the item they had with them, even the type of scent stuck to them. Every detail was carefully recorded. BK Esperin had showed that even the smallest clue can lead to breakthrough in the investigation. DNA sample we collected, and a cross-check with review criminal record from across New York State began. If he thinks he is smart, he has to make our DNA analysis team, Joker one investor. He is so sophisticated they know his preference for bread. A major problem for the investigation team was the long, wide bit with many nooks and crannies, plus the constant changing time, which made it difficult to determine the exact time of death and location of the body. A hydraulic was brought in to smooth the flow of the wave and determine the likelihood of the body moving over time. He drew diagram in Ines note, book occasional let slip, and if with the killer, either like to see test people running like an in the sun. As the investigation expanded, police noticed a striking pattern. On of the victim we involved in prostitution, often working near major thoroughfare book living in the shadow. The killer did not choose his victim randomly, but seemed to have studied the schedule, location, and habit. This led investors to begin to deduce that he had deep knowledge of the community, or had even been a part of the victim work. As its clip was identified, the investigation began to expand across Long Island, including remote areas, other beaches, and even desert islands and parking lots. Team worked together to check surveillance cameras, collect data on suspicious vehicles, and vary the schedule of the people involved. If he had just one car on the beach like a normal person, we will have gone crazy BK theory dozens of cameras missing, one investor lamented. Another volunteer, Sarah, said, an event to the beach to help, but then he found a plastic bag left behind. Extreme BK thought. He didn't detail anion. Luckily the police arrived in time. This story became a small anecdote in the group, but it also emphasized that every attention to be careful observer, from back, paper, to the smallest race. Journalist Constantine found the case, so team putting pressure on the police. One reporter asked, "Are we dealing with a serial killer?" Then an investor tactfully replied, "Well, if he answered distantly, you will definitely run to the beach without stress." The tension between the media and the police made the atmosphere so heavy, but also creep logo up loud in moment amid the horror. While the investigation expanded, the police discovered a new body on another beach, not far from the original, but in a more distant location. The body was wrapped in a large bag, and inside we unearthed clue, personal item from previous victim, raising the possibility that the killer may have kept his collection or was trying to create a cryptic message. He didn't just kill people, he wanted to prove it, research a forensic behavioral analysis. Demonstrate his power and control. The police began working with criminal psychologists, trying to build a behavioral profile of the killer. They recognized several traits. He was extremely meticulous, knew the type, knew how to avoid detection, and camouflage flexibly through different areas without leaving a large trail. This made the investigation even more complicated. He was just a killer, exclaim one behavioral analysis, and he was a strategist. During the investigation, the police also discovered a network of information related to the victim, friends, customers, and coworkers. This helped them narrow down the suspect, but also discovered that few people were with deliberate withholding information, or with too afraid to cooperate. One investor Joker, if Everin told the truth, he probably wouldn't net coffee in the morning. Another aspect is that local residents and big neighbors are starting to worry. Some people certainly set up surveillance cameras in their home, some go for night walk with flashlight and guide dog. The community protect itself, book it also create noise, forcing the police to careful shift around the data. Meanwhile, clue from preview body are compared to our case, a few unexplained disappearance, a few reports of women in the ray disappearance without a trace. Another our record help the police create a behavioral map, predicting arrests with future case might occur. If he moved like this, we must be playing các table in the dark, one investor exclaimed. As the investigation progressed, police also began to suspect a number of individuals reduced with behaving unsulally, including people reduced frequented desert beaches at night, people with violent convictions, and taxi drivers reduced knew the area well. If we are suspect, Joker one profiler, either probably start to get bored BK ever rinse watching me. Finally, AS investor combat Raother Bitches, they found a plastic bag contain several victim personal items, along with a handwritten note attached to be a message. No one knew exactly what it means, but it added to the chilling effect. Not only was the killer acting systematically, but he might also be sending a message of defiance to the police. One investor looked at the note and sighed, if he wanted to be famous, he should definitely achieving his goal. And here, my friend, the investigation continued, with every newly been analyst, every suspect been tracker, and the community both phone and curious. We are about to enter a crucial phase of the investigation, with specific suspect bearing to emerge, and the mystery surround the killer's book slowly unravel, but still further good.
Those of you who are watching and following the case, if you're feeling excited and want to know who will be discovered next, or whether the police will find an important clue, don't look away, because we will take you deep into the suspect files, the DNA clues, and the killer's next moves, where every detail, no matter how small, can completely change the outcome of the case. As investigators continued to comb the beach and surrounding areas, what they called an extended suspect circle began to form. It wasn't a normal circle, but the kind of circle where if you stood in it, you would definitely feel like you were being watched, as if your every move was being recorded and analyzed. Every little detail, from the time you left your house, to the clothes you wore, to the type of shoes you wore, could make you a potential suspect. The police even set up hidden cameras around deserted streets where they suspected the killer might be walking. One of the investigators joked, if he knows we're watching, he's probably grinning and eating cookies. Meanwhile, a web of suspects began to form based on three key factors: behavior, location, and relationship to the victims. Investigators looked at previous criminal records, especially those with a history of violence, sexual assault, or who had been caught stalking women in the sex trade. They also analyzed personal schedules, workplaces, transportation, and daily routines. If he were a normal person, he couldn't have done all this without leaving a trace, one analyst told the team. But the problem is he's not normal. A crucial turning point came when the DNA lab sent back the result from the samples they had collected. The bodies were carefully preserved, and any DNA traces were checked against a national criminal database. A telling detail emerged. One DNA sample did not match any records, meaning the killer may not have been registered in the system. This made the investigation much more difficult, but also opened up a theory. The killer could be a completely normal person on the outside, with a dark side that no one expected. While waiting for the DNA results, investigators began interviewing people close to the victim: friends, customers, and coworkers. Some people provided important information, but many were fearful, evasive, or gave false information. One investigator joked, "If everyone had told the truth, I probably wouldn't have had to drink 3 cups of coffee this morning to stay awake." The information gathered from these witnesses helped create a complete picture of the victim, from where they lived, the routes they took, to the complex social relationships around them. An important clue emerged when the police found a discarded phone near the beach, containing data related to several of the victims. This data provided information about the location, time, and even missed calls from suspicious people. The investigators smiled to each other. Finally, he left us a little signal, as if he was playing a game of cat and mouse. But at the same time, they knew that the killer was extremely sophisticated and not easily detected. In the process of analyzing the suspect's behavior, the investigation team noticed a pattern. The killer chose victims in the same environment, mainly women working in the sex industry, and often committed the act at times when there were few people around. This led criminal psychologists to hypothesize that the killer knew his victims well, perhaps even had contact with them or lived near them. One behavioral analyst commented, "He is not just a killer, he is an artist in creating fear." Meanwhile, forensic investigators began combing the beachfront, vacant lots, remote roads, and deserted parking lots. They searched for the smallest traces, from cigarette packs, pieces of cloth, to suspicious tire tracks. "If he thinks he's smart, he hasn't met our fingerprint team," one investigator sneered. "We know everything from the type of sand on his shoes to the brand of sunscreen he used." Another surprise to the investigators was the discovery of a new body, carefully hidden in a plastic bag, on another beach, about 5 miles from the original scene. The body showed signs of having been moved multiple times, suggesting that the killer had intended not only to kill, but also to create a complex chain of clues to challenge the police. "If he had just killed and left, it would have been easier for us," said one forensic analyst. "But he wanted to play mind games with us." As the investigation progressed, surveillance cameras around the beach and nearby roads were scrutinized. Some of the grainy footage showed a suspicious man moving around at night, but not enough to make a clear identification. Investigators immediately began tracking suspicious vehicles and people, combing through data from phones and personal records. "If he thinks he can hide, he probably doesn't know we have drones and satellites," one investigator smiled. In addition, some volunteers and local residents provided information about suspicious people who frequently appeared near the beach, their travel habits, and strange events that had occurred. Investigators sifted through the information, assessed its reliability, and built a preliminary profile. One investigator joked, "If I had relied on every rumor, I would have arrested half the city." An important step was analyzing the killer's psychological behavior, based on his behavior patterns and choice of victims. Experts determined that he was capable of extremely detailed planning, patient, and did not leave direct traces, but at the same time liked to create small clues to prove his power. This forced the investigation team to race against time and anticipate the killer's moves, like a survival chess game, where each wrong move could put the next victim in danger. One of the notable findings was that there were some clues related to old unsolved cases, including people who had gone missing many years ago. Comparing the data led the police to hypothesize that the killer could have been active for a long time, but was only discovered when the beach became a place to dump bodies. One analyst commented, "He is a professional killer, but like all professionals, he makes mistakes, and we will find those mistakes." They also did not forget to intersperse humorous stories to reduce tension, such as the scene where an investigator forgot to bring coffee and had to drink water all day, or a volunteer mistook a garbage dump for a clue and screamed in horror, making everyone laugh and cry. These moments were both lighthearted and created a sense of closeness for the audience, making them feel like they were not only watching the case, but also companions in the investigation. As the suspect profiles were gradually refined, some interrogators appeared fearful, others arrogant or defiant. Each interrogation session was recorded and carefully analyzed, from the way they spoke, to their eyes, to the way they moved in their chairs. A behavioral analyst sneered, "Sometimes you don't need a statement, just watching the way they frown or glance is enough to know who is lying." Another point of tension was the presence of the media, which put pressure on the police. Reporters and journalists hunted for any information, sometimes publishing unverified news, forcing the investigation team to constantly correct it. One investigator sighed, "If the media were the second murderer, I'm sure he'd be laughing." But on the positive side, thanks to the media, a lot of information from the community was quickly provided, helping to widen the circle of suspects and discover new clues. Finally, it ends on a tense but suspenseful note. The results of some new DNA samples are analyzed. Some suspects are called in, and the investigation team realizes that the mystery is starting to unravel, but there are still too many unanswered questions. The killer is still lurking in the shadows, and any misstep by the police could complicate the case even further. Promises to take us deeper into the crucial interrogations, turning points in the DNA profile. From the very first days of the extensive investigation, investigators realized something obvious but also difficult. The killer was not a typical person. He did not attract attention, did not leave any recognizable traces, and even lived in the community like a ghost. This forced investigators to study every small detail, from his travel habits, social relationships, to the way he interacted with his surroundings. One of the investigators jokingly commented, "If he were a character in a movie, he would definitely be portrayed as the scariest mystery of all time." The investigation team's work became more intense when a new DNA clue unexpectedly appeared. After weeks of testing and comparison, the forensic department announced that they had discovered a DNA sample that matched a previous criminal profile, but did not exactly match any existing database. This opened up a new avenue. The killer might have been tracked by the police in the past, but had never been convicted. This information immediately spread throughout the investigation team, and everyone realized that the door to finding the killer was half open, but many mysteries remained. Meanwhile, the interrogations with the main suspects began. One of the first to be invited was a middle-aged man who lived about a 10-minute drive from the beach, who had a history of sexual harassment but had never killed anyone. When he entered the interrogation room, his eyes were cold, but his hands were shaking slightly, a detail that criminal behavior experts quickly noted. One investigator thought to himself, "If he's shaking with fear, he's about to talk. If not, he might be a real professional." The interrogation lasted for hours, with questions carefully crafted to predict behavior, habits, and psychological reactions. Each of the suspects' responses was recorded, filmed, and analyzed with facial recognition software. "If I had to watch his face for another 5 minutes, I'd probably take a yoga class to relax," one investigator joked. But amid the tension, a crucial detail emerged. The suspect accidentally mentioned a road and time when the victims had been near the beach, something that no one outside the investigation team and the suspect knew. The police immediately took note, and it became the most important clue of all. Meanwhile, the newly discovered victims continued to be forensically investigated. Experts noticed a similar pattern. The bodies had died of asphyxiation and had been moved multiple times, all placed in locations where the killer thought they were unlikely to be discovered. Psychoanalysts began building a psychological profile of the killer, predicting that he was extremely patient, meticulous, and in control of every situation. "He's not just a killer, he's a strategist," one expert said. "Every move he makes is carefully calculated." Investigators also began looking into digital clues. A previously discarded phone was analyzed further, revealing missed calls and text messages from unknown numbers, along with location data from the previous weeks. The digital forensics team discovered that the killer used a different phone number to reach his victims, a sophisticated tactic to cover his tracks. "If he thinks we don't know how to track data, he's dead wrong," one investigator sneered. During the investigation, a volunteer living near the beach provided important information. One rainy night, they saw a black pickup truck driving through the backcountry roads, seemingly looking for something. The team immediately compared this data with the records of the truck owners and travel schedules, and discovered a new suspect with a matching schedule. This became a crucial turning point, causing the police team to focus all their efforts on this subject. In addition, forensic analysis of the evidence at the scene continued to reveal clues. A piece of cloth, a small electrical wire, even a discarded cigarette, but all were compared to the suspect's profile. "If he thought he could hide his tracks," said a forensic expert, "he didn't know we had a lab, a microscope, and a crazy passion for investigation." Adding to the tension was the presence of dual suspects. One person was named the prime suspect, but when the records were checked, some traces matched another person, forcing the police to investigate both subjects in parallel. "If I had to follow two people at the same time, I would need a small army and double the coffee," one investigator joked. But this pressure also pushed the investigation team to conduct more aggressive interrogation steps, with the aim of exploiting the smallest loopholes in the suspects. Meanwhile, criminal psychologists hypothesized that the killer might be someone familiar with the area, perhaps even someone who had lived near the beach for a long time. They analyzed the victims' travel patterns, their locations, and how they disposed of the bodies, creating a detailed behavioral map that helped the police predict where the killer might strike next. Another step forward was the DNA testing of the suspects. After several tense days, a DNA sample from a suspect matched several samples collected from a scene. The team held their breath for a few seconds before realizing that the door to finding the killer had finally been completely opened. One investigator sighed. Finally, we have something he can't hide, his DNA. But the story doesn't end there. The killer, knowing he has been discovered, begins to change his behavior, moving bodies to new locations, changing his route to the victims, and even using more sophisticated means of communication to avoid being tracked. This creates a tense race between the police and the killer, where each move determines the next outcome. While the pressure is high, the investigation team still interjects humorous moments to maintain morale. One investigator jokes, "If it weren't for the humor, I would have cried on the beach a long time ago." These lighthearted stories help to keep the audience breathing, but do not reduce the tension of the case. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was tense, the pale yellow light falling on the old wooden table where the main suspect sat facing the investigation team. Everyone in the team knew that this was the decisive moment, the moment when every clue, every trace, every moment of observation over the past week would be tested. The police chief, who usually teased his colleagues with humorous stories to relieve tension, was silent today, focusing entirely on the suspect's cold but somewhat worried eyes. One investigator thought to himself, if he were an actor, he would definitely be trying to win an Oscar for playing the most tense murderer of all time. The investigation team began by presenting solid DNA evidence, cigarette butts, fabric fibers, and details about how the killer moved the body. As the evidence was presented, the suspect remained cold, occasionally smirking, seemingly calculating each word before speaking. But the truth was, his eyes began to tremble slightly, a small sign that criminal behavior experts quickly recognized. He was afraid. A humorous investigator suddenly whispered to his colleague, "It's like watching a detective movie, except for the suspenseful music." But in the room, no one laughed. Everyone realized that this was the most intense battle of wits in their investigative career. The detectives took turns asking questions, every clue, every small loophole that the suspect could have left over the past 10 years. They asked about full moon nights, trips to deserted beaches, mysterious phone calls, and places he had been that only the police knew. The suspect began to feel pressured. His answers became hesitant, sometimes contradicting what he had said before. A behavioral analyst thought to himself, "Aha, here comes the truth. This is the best part of the cat and mouse game." But the real climax was yet to come. As the investigators presented the files on the newly discovered victims, and especially their digital connections, the suspect began to show signs of stress. He knew that every phone call, every text message, every email address could be traced. Data that had been invisible had now become irrefutable evidence. The investigators took turns presenting his online connections, how he approached his victims, even how he learned their schedules before committing the crimes. The pressure built up on the suspect, and he fell silent for a moment, his eyes looking down at the table as if searching for an escape route. But it was too late. "If he thinks he can hide online, he's wrong," said a digital forensics expert. "Every online behavior leaves a trace, and we're going to find it." Meanwhile, other investigators continued to mine physical clues, traces on clothing, hair, DNA samples. They put it all together to form a complete picture of the suspect crimes. The climax comes when the police ask for details that only the perpetrator would know, how he arranged the bodies, the location of the objects, and the exact time he moved. The suspect cannot keep the information secret, and each little detail comes out, making the entire investigation team both excited and nervous. One investigator jokes, but still looks nervous. "If this were a game show, we just hit the jackpot." But the case is not just a confrontation between the police and the suspect. It is also a journey to explore the killer's motives, psychology, and past. Psychologists begin to analyze how he grew up, his social relationships, how he approached women, and how he hid himself. They see a pattern. The killer is extremely careful and meticulous, but has a deep psychological insecurity that may be the cause of the murder. Each analysis is like a piece of the puzzle that helps complete the crime picture. While the suspect is silent, another investigator brings up an unexpected piece of evidence, a photo stored on his phone, taken near a location where the victim appeared, with a detail that only the police know. This image is like a punch to the suspect. He begins to tremble, and his testimony gradually reveals gaps that he previously thought no one knew. His every word, every glance, is carefully recorded by the investigation team. The climax continues when the investigation team confirms that all the DNA, online connections, physical clues, and the suspect's testimony match completely. This is when all doubts disappear, and the murderer has no way to escape. Finally, the cat-and-mouse game is over, one investigator thought. But there's still a sense of relief because there are still questions about motive and consequences. But Chapter 5 doesn't stop at the arrest. It opens the door to the sequel, where the audience will witness the online connections, the network of victims, and how the killer used the internet to hide his actions. A natural, humorous introduction is given. If you think it's all over, think again. It's just the beginning. In Part 3, Long Island Serial Killer, Online Connections, every mystery will be revealed through every click, every message, and every seemingly invisible connection. Stay tuned, because the clues are even more interesting than in this interrogation room. And so, it ends with, the fierce confrontation is complete, the main mysteries are solved, but there are still big questions about the killer's online network, inviting the audience to continue the journey in Part 3. While the suspect is led away, the investigation team returns to their desks, sharing jokes to cool off and planning the next step, exploring the online world of Long Island Serial Killer, where every click, every message, every email can be a vital clue. An investigator chuckled. Who said online crimes were easier? Turns out, with just one wrong click, we had his whole life in our hands.